thus abandon it as obsolete. The source quote from the Republic, Book 3, page 79. Mustn't the young pursue them behaviors that lead to good disposition everywhere if they are to do their own work? This simply quoted question is drawn from a greater passage where Socrates and Glaucon talk about how even if the craftsmen in their hypothetical perfect city that they created for argumentative purposes must be raised and educated in all subjects, not just those that pertain to their craft. When I read this passage in the Republic, it seemed obvious why students should pursue all of their subjects to the best of their abilities, even if they may not be their favorite subjects. As I read the Republic further, this truth became all the more apparent, though this brought up a question about modern education. Why do so many students slack off in classes if they either aren't personally interested in it or it doesn't pertain to their major? Whilst most public and private schools merely allow these students who slack off to suffer in their own time, classical education does not allow this. The teachers in a classical curriculum make sure that all of the students are paying attention and participating fully. Though lack of participation is but one of a myriad of problems encountered in the public schooling system, all the way up through college, that are not present in the classical system. Those problems are not mere superficialities or quirks of the system, but seem to be rooted in the philosophy behind the system. However, the philosophy allows for greater range of thought and mingling of ideas, whereas classical education does not allow for the problems in secular education to pop up, but remains more stubborn in its beliefs. I therefore now ask the question, is the philosophy behind classical education better than that behind secular education? Before my defense begins in earnest, I would like to define a few terms for the audience. The first three are the Tao, the good, and the Logos. The Tao is a concept from Eastern philosophy. The good comes directly from Plato's Republic. Both of these terms are wrapped up in the Logos, a term used by St. John to describe Christ. All three of these terms refer to and name the truth that existed before all time, each in their own way. Another term that must be defined is regime. Regime can mean anything from an authoritarian government to how a culture collectively lives its life. The final term that must be defined is soul. For this defense, the soul, or nous, is the part of the man that is rooted in the same place as the Logos, whereas St. John refers to it, the good, whereas St. John refers to it, the Logos. My summary, as written in my paper, is as follows. The current secular system, in removing all traditional values, must redefine the truth by mere majority vote, and therefore has no anchor or guide, and therefore does not have the capacity to discover or understand anything to the fullest extent, just until the majority view shifts. Classical education remembers the unchanging good and directs the students towards it as an end goal and as a moral guide. Therefore, is the philosophy behind classical education better than that behind secular education? Yes, it is, because the philosophy behind classical education is truly aimed towards teaching the students, rather than the secular system, which merely wishes to condition the students. In a Socratic exchange of wisdom that nurtures the student's soul in all aspects, classical education guides the students to become complete and true men and women, and masters and guardians over their own souls. Now that my terms are defined and thesis summarized, I will now be asked questions by these distinguished magisters regarding the content and meaning of my thesis.
All right. Thank you, David. Welcome. So after reading your paper several times, I feel like the big thing that it reminds me of is, well, it provokes this thought to me, which is the image from the Meno, which we actually went over a little bit ago. The idea that we have this education called secular, and we have this education called classical. And in one of the dialogues, Socrates makes an analogy between bees, where you have a big bee and a little bee. What's the bee-ness of a bee? What makes a bee a bee? So I would ask the same thing of you. What is education? Just take off the terms classical or secular, and what's the essence of education?
The essence of education seems to be through examining education through the lens of both Plato and Socrates in classical times and the abolition of man in more modern times, as well as being in education most of my life. It seems to be the passing on of either knowledge or wisdom in some form so that the student may gain knowledge or wisdom to some end. Now that end can either be good or bad, depending on who's educating and what their agenda is.
Okay. Interesting.
It's toward an end. Is that in something that is awakened and present in the individual first, or is that in something that's wholly exterior to the process of education as you go through it?
Well, the end is certainly in the mind of the sectors of the course, or whoever wishes to decide what is to be educated, whether that's course setters in a bureaucratic office in a school who then divvy out the work to the teachers, or whether it's to individual teachers, each asked to make their own course, or even just to a singular teacher like a Socrates in here, or a Virgil in Dante's Inferno. So there is some preconception to education always. It's just how
So
many
there's
are
always
there.
this student-teacher relationships, master and pupil, even in the most secular context.
Though in the most secular context, that's stretching the meaning of those words to the point where they're warped.
Well, so that did really strike me. You said they all have an end. It's just a question of good or bad. To me, that that just in logic class, this last period, it was just I asked them to say, okay, if we have a human, and we have a human insofar as he's a husband, or let's say a soldier, what is his job? His job is to protect. If insofar as he is a son, or sorry, friend, what should he do? Be a good friend or something to that effect. We got to the point where it says, okay, if you're human insofar as you're a politician, what should you do? And the discussion got really exciting because we said, well, is it what you should do or what actually happens all the time, seemingly? So, so the question, so you mentioned ends, good or bad, but isn't the end of anything supposed to be towards a good? And anything less than that's really not meeting the nature or the purpose of what a thing is meant for.
Yeah, I will agree with that, that the end of everything should be towards a good, or the good, actually. However, unfortunately, we live in a fallen world where sometimes people can, using just formal logic, twist the good around to meet their own personal agenda. And in the end, they can twist it around to something which outwardly would appear evil, even though in their own minds it is completely justified and towards a truly good end.
Right?
Do you think that it's possible to, for example, I was educated in an entirely secular context throughout most of my life. Do you think it's possible to even have a definition of education in its essence without a classical paradigm, or at least a paradigm that makes the good, or the Tao, logos, explicit?
I would personally say from research gathered that by the time the root of that the good is lost, education simply becomes conditioning to the whims of the conditioners, let's just call them, those who have said, well, we have officially abolished all morals and precedents and anything that we could use to justify, so we must write our own. But then how should we justify it? The rest is stated.
Well, okay, so that's really good to me. So the question then becomes, what's the opposite of conditioning? What then is classical? If that's what secular does, what does classical do?
Well, if I may use a metaphor from my thesis itself, actually it's from The Abolition of Man, where C.S. Lewis himself says that the old system, or the classical education system, is analogous to how older birds deal with younger birds and teaching them how to fly. Whereas the modern system is more like a poultry keeper as regards to like the chicks that they have hatched. The chicks don't know what they're doing, they don't really care, they're just being shunted along and for whatever purpose the poultry keeper might have. Whereas with the classical, the teacher has had and remembers all the experiences that they had when they were a student in the place of the student under them, as well as knowing the end goal of the good, and therefore remembers what the student was going through, and therefore can help them directly and help them come to a better understanding of the good.
Well, let's use that analogy then and push it even further. So you say, whereas the classical teaches the old bird to the young, how that happens, and then you said the other one is poultry keeper. Well, okay, what's the goal of the poultry keeper with his poultry?
The goal of the poultry keeper with his poultry is to make the poultry grow into big fat chickens or ducks, generally for the slaughter.
Okay, and then what's the purpose then of an older bird and a younger bird?
The purpose of the older bird teaching the younger bird is to pass on the skills that the older bird has learned throughout life to the younger bird, so that the younger may have those skills and may even learn something new through it. And in the case which C.S. Lewis uses, the ability to fly, which
Right.
oftentimes is something taught.
To me that's completely different.
Yeah.
And an amazing image. On the one hand, the end of the poultry keeper's death for the people, whereas the end of the parents of the bird is to set it free.
Yeah.
Essentially.
Exactly, and that also seems to be sometimes the end of